Auburn has fired Gus Malzahn after 8 seasons as head coach on the Plains. Final record here, 68-35 overall, 39-27 in SEC play. You heard, a lot of you noticed because you DM'd me, you heard my tone change on this about last week, around this time last week. And the reason my tone changed is because up until that point I had told you I'll be very surprised. I think I may have even used the word shocked. I'll be shocked if they make a move on him. I wasn't messing with you. I was going to be shocked. And I'm not shocked today only because the tone change last week was due to some people pretty close to this situation saying, hey, this is not hypothetical. This is not down the road. Like, this is now. There is a real good chance that he's going to lose his job. I still was in the need to see it to believe it camp, but I kind of changed my tone. And some of you felt that if you watch every show, listen to every show, you pay attention. So a lot of you were asking me behind the scenes, you were DMing me, emailing me, hey, why do you sound so different all of a sudden? Do you know something? Well, I didn't know anything per se. I knew people who knew things per se, and they were changing their tone. So I did so accordingly. I think Gus Malzahn's pretty surprised too. Sometimes you think, oh, if I could only talk to the head coach whose job is on the line, I could have all the information. A lot of times they're just as in the dark as you are, and maybe I am. Obviously, they don't find out until the guillotine comes down. That was graphic, but necessary. And so I think Gus Malzahn thought that he was safe this year. Now, you're never fully safe at Auburn. Everyone knows that. He knows that all too well. And he's played those a couple of times into being parlayed into contract extension. So he knows how to play the game, and he's got the right folks representing him. I think he's kind of surprised at this. Shocked? Maybe not. Kind of surprised. But I'll tell you what I was told last week. Tweeted this out earlier. I'll reiterate it for those of you who aren't following me on there, at Late Kick Josh, by the way. I was told by the same folks who indicated that the wheels were in motion here, maybe irreversibly so, and as it turns out, that was right. I was told by those same folks, if they make a move, and that was a big if at the time, if they make a move, you can rest assured it means they think they already have the replacement locked up. Now, a couple of things could be true. Okay? Because I don't know where this stands right now. A couple of things could be true. They could feel that way, and they could also get burned. Because unless you've got pen on paper, unless you've got them on the jet and they're flying down to Auburn, Alabama, well, nothing's really locked up. And a lot of times these kinds of situations are used for the big L word. It's very important. You don't get to enjoy it very often, but when you get leverage, you use it. And some folks even go as far as to exploit it for their own personal gain. How dare they? You're looking at one of them on the bottom of your screen right now, by the way. So I don't necessarily know that there's anything locked up. I can tell you there are some people who believe that there are things locked up. However, it would be very irresponsible of us to just throw around names here because I don't believe that there is any name that's been locked up. So we're going to have some time to talk about that, and I'll do so in just a second, actually. But I want to ask you something because let's talk about Malzahn for just a second. Had a lot of takes on him today from a lot of different angles. So I want to ask you, whether you're an Auburn fan, whether you went to Auburn, whether you went to Kennesaw State and it's just up the road and so you just pull for him. I don't care if you're a Michigan State fan and you've never even been to the state of Alabama. Everybody, I want you to ask yourself this question. You watch college football. You've seen this dude. You got an opinion of him. He's been around a long time. Do you think he failed at Auburn? You think he's a failure? Because I asked that question to some folks today, and I was very surprised at not only the differences in the responses, but how strongly opinionated everyone was in their response. There were very few fence riders here, in other words. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion. I got my own head coach power ratings. Malzahn is a top 20 head coach currently. Like today, he got fired. He is currently in my top 20 of head coaching power ratings in all of FBS, so all of major college football. He's in my top 20. He just got fired. So obviously, I'm not one who looks at him as a failure. A lot of people do look at him as a failure, and I'm just going to give you, again, my humble opinion here. I think that displays an utter lack of grasp of how insanely hard the job at Auburn is. It is the, pound for pound, I've told you before, hardest job in America. It's not harder than Kent State, but yet Kent State, they don't expect titles there. They expect you to contend at Auburn. At Kent State, you're not parked down the road from the greatest head coach in the history of college football. You are at Auburn. At Auburn, you're also recruiting heads up against 4 of the biggest 6 or 7 recruiting powers in America right now in Bama, Georgia, LSU, and Texas A&M. So unless you're matching them, you know at the start of every year, Malzahn's known this for a while, at the start of every year, he's going to be at a roster disadvantage against about a third of his schedule. Now, you could look at me and you could say, well, they should have recruited better. Okay, I'll grant you that. I'm not saying it's impossible. But what I want you to understand is, and I want to say this very slowly, there are some coaches out there that you may consider not top 20, not top 25, but top 10, who would have long since wilted under what that guy was having to deal with year in and year out. You don't believe that, and I know you don't, and that's fine. But some of your darlings out there that are rated solidly top 10 would have wilted under the Auburn spotlight. The Auburn spotlight is unique for several reasons unto any in the sport. That's not meant in a pejorative context. Sometimes it can be. I think it's a great place, but it's a very unique place. There is no other culture like that. So it's got its own little world down there. Grew up very close to it, intimately familiar with it. You know my stance on expectations and standards. If you've watched this show any length of time, I'm not that guy that a lot of other folks out there are who make fun of fans when they get mad when their team doesn't win. I appreciate the passion. I appreciate the expectation, and I've told you before, and for those of you who are new, I'll tell you again. Sometimes you buy yourself the ability and the freedom to have sky-high expectation. The way you buy those things are really twofold. You can buy them, obviously, financially, and then you can buy them through emotion. When you have financially and emotionally invested in mass, an entire culture, a fan base, in other words, when you have invested top dollar and you have emotionally invested to the best of your abilities, it's only right. In any other walk of life, if you invest at an A level, you want A level returns. That's just common sense. Anyone who's gone through a high school economics class understands that. But here's a little bit different world that we're living in college football, and that's you got to ask what's feasible, what's realistic to expect. It's okay if you've invested and you say, I got a buddy across the street who's a Georgia grad, and I do everything that they do. He tells me what they donate, and he tells me what they're asked to do and what they're asked to give, and my Bama buddy the same way, and I do what they do. I want returns like they have. Completely natural to feel that way. I'm not going to dump on you because you feel that way. What is feasible given the current reality? Because that's the question everyone in the Auburn world is asking themselves right now. There are a lot of opinions out there, and a lot of the opinions involve that man, Gus Malzahn, not living up to it. So I want you to keep in mind, when I tell you this is the hardest job in America, I don't mean it's impossible to succeed there. I just mean the hurdles are very high. And as we're denigrating Gus Malzahn, not all of you, but some of you, I also want you to know some things that aren't readily apparent if you just turn on CBS or ESPN for 3.5 hours on a Saturday. That guy lagged, resource-wise, significantly in some cases, behind all those big rivals that I was talking about. Auburn has put lipstick on a lot of pigs down there, and behind the scenes, they are woefully inept. There is some catch-up happening, but they still got a long way to go in some other areas. You have got a Taj Mahal in Tuscaloosa, and you've got Georgia, who has separated themselves trying to keep up with Alabama. LSU's the same. Texas A&M's the same. They haven't kept up at Auburn. That's just the painful reality. The folks there know it. The folks closer you get to the program, the more intimately familiar they are with that reality. Here was the problem. It's very layered. It's never as easy as, is he good enough or is he not good enough? You have got and have had for quite a while some big money folks around the Auburn program who were not coming off their wallet until Gus Malzahn was out of there. They did not view him as the long-term answer to their program. I'm not one to tell anyone how else to spend their money. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think anyway. You've earned it over the years. It's your right to spend it however you want to. And so a lot of the investment that was needed was kind of held hostage, and this was one of the terms. You want 7 numbers on this check instead of just mid-6s every year? Well, you put the right guy in the driver's seat, and then maybe we'll revisit that. COVID or no COVID, maybe we'll revisit that. So expectations are fine, but now, what are we going to get here? What's the reality? What's feasible? And then who's out there that is a definitive upgrade? Why didn't he succeed, in other words? So what has to happen? Why weren't they winning enough under Gus Malzahn? Well, number one, they never got quarterback figured out. Gus Malzahn, the only times, and this has been well chronicled by this point, the only times he's really won big down there, it was with transfer quarterbacks. He had to go get someone else's, and it was an already made product or hopefully close to already made, and then he brought him in and he won. Think Nick Marshall, think Jarrett Stidham, you get the idea. There was never a homegrown product. The closest they came to that was, well, the current product, Bo Nix. I mean, that's the closest that they came to it, and I think that there have been very mixed results, to say the least, on the field from him his first 2 years. Number two, they never recruited well enough. Now, this is where, when you start to attract another coach, this is where you got to try and think differently. Try and think on a different plane than just an observer. Think about yourself as a prime candidate for the Auburn job. And think about what I just said. I just told you they hadn't recruited well enough. Well, hey, if I'm a candidate for this job, I'll just go pull up 247sports.com right quick and I'll say, well, what in the world? They were number 8 that year, number 10, number 12, number 9. It looks like they recruit around a top 10 level every year. That's right. And it's not good enough. You want to look at the teams ahead of them? Bama's up there every year. Georgia's up there every year. LSU is going to be up there every year. Texas A&M is going to be up there every year. You got to play them every year. This is the only program in the United States of America that has the unenviable task of facing Georgia, Alabama, LSU, and Texas A&M every single year. And so if you're not recruiting at a top 5 level perennially, and you're not just dominating the transfer market, or hopefully both of those things, chances are you're going to find yourself at a roster disadvantage 2, 3, or maybe 4 times per year. It's not sustainable to contend at a double-digit win level. That's where they want you floating. They want you capable of winning 10 minimum every single year. That's what they want you capable of. Malzahn couldn't do it. It doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out why he couldn't do it, but he couldn't do it. And here's the other thing that they got to do. Okay, they are playing the long game here, and I want to tell you what I mean by that. Immediately, you got to come into Auburn, you got to compete against Nick Saban. But more and more when people are making coaching changes in the SEC, now whether this is accurate or not, I don't know, because I can't know what Nick Saban's thinking. A lot of folks down here are positioning themselves for a post-Nick Saban SEC. I'm of the opinion that's a little ways off still. But a lot of folks down here are positioning themselves for that nonetheless. So the next Auburn hire, yeah, he's got to initially go up against Nick Saban, but the folks at Auburn, understandably so, are hoping that they're positioning themselves where we get the right guy in, we overturn the culture, we get everything in place, the wiring is fit the way we want it to, and then when Nick Saban's no longer at Alabama, unless they go full Ryan Day in finding his replacement, unless they go full Lincoln Riley in finding his replacement, then we'll be positioned to surge in the SEC West. That's the thinking right now. But remember, this roster needs a lot of work. By the very nature of what we just talked about was lacking under Malzahn. Certainly wasn't perfect. I don't agree with the move, but he had a lot of merit, also had a lot of problems there, so I understand the move, even if I don't necessarily put my stamp of approval on it. Roster needs work, and also this upcoming class is very poor. So there's no immediate help on the way. So I just want to whisper that patience, that word that no one likes to hear down there, especially if you think you're paying enough to where you buy yourself out of having to wait. Can't do it. You can't microwave the process that it takes to overturn a program and then compete with the best in the business, maybe in the history of the sport. There is no shortcut to that. Doesn't matter if you pay the next candidate $20 million. You don't buy your way out of having to play that longer game. Candidates? I've heard Mario Cristobal's name out there. I've seen Hugh Freeze's name out there. I just want to tell you, I don't know how large the contingent is, but I just want to tell you there's a name that's not totally off the radar, but it is kind of out in left field right now. Now, I don't know how realistic it is. There are some people around the Auburn program who have put a bullseye on James Franklin. James Franklin feels like a fit at Auburn to me. I have no clue how obtainable or not he is. I have no clue if he has a desire to leave Penn State. I don't know. All I can confidently confirm to you is there are some people with a little bit of sway, at least, around Auburn who would love to see that happen. We'll see where this goes, but like I told you, the sentiment there as of last week from people who would know is if they do make the move, and obviously they have since then, they're pretty confident that they've got their guy locked up. Who is the guy? Well, I guess that's what this week will be for us to talk about.